Speaking of corrupted media outlets, Vivek Ramaswamy went on CNN last night where he had a town hall that was hosted by one of the new CNN personalities, Abby Phillips, who came to CNN from the Washington Post. And one of the things that she asked him about was Vivek's claim that, as I said, he made for the first time on my show. He came on very shortly after all the video footage of January 6th was released, not just the parts that Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff selected for us to see, but all of it. And you saw things like the police leading a lot of the protesters into the Capitol, not violently, but peacefully. And Vivek saw that, and he did a lot of research into the fact that there were FBI informants on the ground at the Capitol. The FBI was getting real-time information on January 6th from its informants who were part of the insurrectionists, but they also had infiltrated every one of the three groups that ended up being accused of having organized this so-called insurrection. The Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, and the Oath Keepers. The FBI had its tentacles in every single one of these groups. So when Vivek is saying it's an inside job, what he means is the FBI was all around it and all over it. He doesn't mean they planned it or coordinated it. But he also talks about the fact that Michigan case of where they arrested a bunch of people on the right-wing anti-government activists and claimed they wanted to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer right before the election was filled with FBI informants as well. And as a result, several of those people ended up being acquitted because they were directed and lured by the FBI's informants who were being controlled by the FBI. This is what the FBI has been doing for decades. But if you say this, because the corporate media is so loyal to and subservient to and defensive of the U.S. security state and the FBI, they act like you're crazy. Like the FBI doesn't create crimes. I spent years as part of the war on terror reporting on cases where the FBI didn't have enough terrorism cases in the United States to justify all the money it was spending and all the powers it said it needed, including eavesdropping without warrants. So they would have these scummy informants who they caught in other crimes like embezzlement or common financial fraud, pretend to be a new attendee of a mosque somewhere, and they would target these young Muslims, often ones with severe financial problems or emotional difficulties. And the FBI informant would get plots that came from the FBI. Hey, let's go up, blow up this bridge. And if they said no, they'd come back the next day and say, hey, I have this money, I have this plan, look at, here's the blueprint of the bridge. And they kept luring them and coercing them and pressuring them. So many of the domestic terrorism cases that the FBI claimed it disrupted and patted itself on the back for having done so actually were devised by the FBI, directed by the FBI. Through their use of informants, they've infiltrated political groups in the United States for decades to do this. And yet, these idiots in the corporate media who think it's unpatriotic to criticize the FBI, who used to say, oh, you can't speak ill of Robert Mueller or question Robert Mueller. He led the FBI. To do so is to impugn the good men and women keeping our country safe. They don't know this history. They're empty-headed. And so when Vivek was at this town hall and Abby Phillips wanted to ask him about this theory, I think that's totally fine. She should have asked him. I asked him about it as well. But as you're going to see, she was so agitated, so uncomfortable, had no clue what to do. She just wouldn't let him speak. She just kept talking over him and calling him a liar and insisting that he had no evidence. And let's watch this. We're going to play it in just a second. There we go.
Let me ask you about something that you said at the debate last week. You used the phrase inside job to describe what happened on January 6th. The next day, Capitol rioter Alan Hostetter highlighted your comments at his sentencing. He is going to prison for 11 years. Hostetter threatened members of Congress. He brought a hatchet, knives, pepper spray, stun batons, tactical gear to the U.S. Capitol. Are you concerned that a convicted felon like that is now promoting your comments in court?
So first of all, this question is so stupid. It's so stupid. Think about this question. So there's this bad guy. He's in a criminal trial, she's saying. And he used Vivek's comments about January 6th in an effort to defend himself. And then she's like, aren't you concerned about that? Why would you be concerned about that? Who cares? That has nothing to do with anything. The only thing that matters is what Vivek is saying truthful? Does it have evidentiary support? If it's truthful and a January 6th defendant then cites it, that's how the justice system is supposed to work. Look at this primitive, moronic, low-grade tactic she's using. Oh, this bad person over here cited what you said. Doesn't that prove that what you're doing is terrible? It's just such a lowbrow, unjournalistic way of thinking. The only thing that matters is that comment true or not? But she's trying, of course, to speak to a liberal audience and say, you know, those January 6th insurrectionists, those are bad people. If they're using what he's saying in their attempt to reduce their massive sentences, their prison sentences, then somehow that means the statement is obviously bad or false. It's such an intellectually dishonest tactic, but she just can't formulate a question. CNN can't formulate a question based on the merits. They have no idea what he's talking about. They don't understand the arguments he's making because the world of CNN is so closed that it's not like they know this evidence and are pretending it's not there. They really don't know it. People like this don't hear it. The only people they speak to are other liberals or other liberal journalists who are just as empty-headed, who are just as trite and read from the same script. It is a closed information system. Watch how this proceeds.
Here's my concern, Abby, and I want to tell you guys where I'm at. If you had told me, it's close to 3 years ago that January 6, 2021 happened. If you had told me 3 years ago, back when I was a biotech CEO, not steeped in this world, I was just consuming passive media, but was focused on my world of developing medicines. If you had told me that January 6 was in any way an inside job, the subject of government entrapment, I would have told you that was crazy talk. Fringe conspiracy theory nonsense. I can tell you now, having gone somewhat deep in this, it's not. I mean, the reality is this. We do have a government, first of all, we have to acknowledge, that has lied to us systematically over the last several years about the origin of COVID-19, about the Hunter Biden laptop that we were told was false by 51 CIA experts and otherwise before we now know that it was true. You can go straight down the list, the Trump-Russia disinformation collusion hoax, all of it. Now we come to January 6th. The reality is we know that there were federal law enforcement agents in that field. We don't know how many. I think it's shameful. If I may finish just answering.
Well, let me
this is really important.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here because
I know the establishment doesn't approve of this message. I know this, but we should be able to talk about this.
You're saying that there were federal agents.
This is important to talk about.
You are saying there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th. Yep. There is no evidence that there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
So why, before Congress, when pressed on what the number was, they didn't say there were none? They just couldn't say how many there were.
So you're saying that that you have not seen any evidence that there were.
We've seen multiple informants suggesting that there were. We know people were FBI informants who were asked to.
Is there any evidence?
May I just finish this and you can come back and question me?
Well, let me clarify.
I know it's very uncomfortable for you.
I'm going to clarify my question.
I know this is an uncomfortable issue for many people, but we have to do the truth.
I'm going to clarifar my question because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm asking.
I understand this deeply. And I told you, I was with you 3 years ago. I'm not there now.
Where is the evidence?
Yes.
Where is the evidence that the government had a plot, an inside job?
But no, I'm going to tell you what an inside job is because I'm not
violence on January 6th.
So first of all, she completely distorted what he said so that she can have like her big moment. Like, I stand up to politicians and I don't let them get away with false statements. I correct it. I fact check them. And so she took what he said, which is that there were FBI informants on the ground. There were FBI informants in this group that the FBI has used entrapment in the past. And she made it into a caricature. Where's the evidence that it was the FBI that did this plot, that it was an inside job, that they were the ones who did it? And that's not what he said. And she's interrupting him every 4 words. I was counting as I was watching that. He couldn't get more than 4 words out. He was trying to answer her question. She didn't want an answer. She wanted it to be her moment where people said, oh, wow, Abby Phillips is a tough interviewer. But she wasn't doing anything that is difficult or that is tough or journalistically impressive. She just wouldn't shut up and listen to his answer. Do you know how easy it is to have a guest on the show and I ask them a question and then I wait about 2 seconds and then I interrupt and start talking over them and then I make a point and then they go to speak again and then I interrupt them 6 seconds later and start yelling at them and telling them they have no evidence? This is not difficult. This is the easiest thing in the world to do. When you look at who these journalists think are such great interviewers like Mehdi Hassan, half the time what they're really doing, or more than half the time, is they're just filibustering. They're yelling at people. They're speaking over them. They're letting them speak for 7 seconds and distorting what they're saying. These are not smart tactics. These are not difficult tactics. They're not impressive tactics. If I have someone on my show, I'm going to ask them the hardest question I can think of. I'm going to insist they answer, but I'm also going to let them give their answer. I'm going to listen to it, and then I'm going to dissect it. I'm going to point out where it's wrong. I'm going to point to evidence, but I'm always going to let them speak because that's the coward's way out. So she took what he said, turned it into a joke, and then tried to claim that there was no evidence for it. He's too smart to allow that to happen, so let's listen to how this unfolds.
I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth. I'm going to put my words in my mouth. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that.
Where is the evidence that the government was involved in planning or executing January 6th?
So I'm going to give you hard facts. And if I may, Abby, I know this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but we're going to go through this, and you can push back on it after that. And you can push back on that. And let's do this fairly. Why did they suppress footage of now what's been released? 200 hours of footage of shooting rubber bullets into that crowd, shooting tear gas into that crowd. You didn't see that before. You saw what the response was to that. Now you see footage coming out of actually rolling out the red carpet for Capitol Police allowing people in.
Again.
So he said, look, just let me answer. Let me explain. You keep asking me for the evidence. You keep saying there's no evidence. I'm going to tell you what the evidence is. And then when I'm done, you can push back all you want. She can't hear it. She won't allow these facts to go over the CNN airways. Do you see how she just interrupted him again? It was maybe like 20 seconds of speaking, but she tried interrupting him after about 10 seconds, and he just kind of pushed her away and talked over her. This is pathetic. Let's listen.
Right through the front door.
The vast majority of the footage
evidence should have been released before, Abby.
Mr. Ramaswamy, the vast majority of the footage shows police officers being overrun
and I want to talk about one more
by
case.
violent
this is really important.
rioters. That's
I'm
what
going to give you some hard facts.
Of it shows.
So here's what entrapment is.
You can't cherry pick.
I'm not cherry picking. If I may finish, Abby. If I may finish, Abby. I'm not cherry picking.
Examples.
To the contrary. To the contrary.
You know who cherry picked examples?
You know who cherry picked? The government.
That is what happened.
The government cherry picked 12 hours of footage.
We've been listening to this now for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. I don't think there has been one time, other than when he first started trying to explain himself, when he was maybe able to talk for 20 seconds, that she has let him speak without talking over him. It just gives you a headache. It's totally worthless. But it also shows what they're scared of. We're going to show you in just a second what Vivek is referring to, that I guarantee you Abby Phillips has no knowledge of, even though it's from the New York Times, because it just doesn't comport with her worldview or her narrative. But she's just chattering the whole time, just talking over him. She keeps saying she wants to hear the evidence, but when he tries to give it to her, she won't let him.
When there was 200 hours of it, cherry picking was the government, not me. Release the whole thing. And let me just finish one thing, too, because this is super important as a topic.
So
I think this is a civil libertarian issue of our time. Gretchen Whitmer's kidnapping. I want to be really clear on this, because it's the same issue in the same FBI, same even part of the FBI. 3 people who were in an alleged plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer were acquitted at the end of trial because it was entrapment. That is, government agents put them up to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done. They gave them credit cards with spending limits of up to $5,000, encouraged them to buy munitions, plan something they weren't otherwise willing to plan. So much so, and I want people at home to know this, especially CNN viewers to know this, is that one of the jurors went to those defendants and apologized afterwards, gave him a hug, apologized, seeing what the government had put a poor guy up to who had to go to some Mexican restaurant across the street to get hot water. These people were exploited with credit cards up to $5,000, FBI agents putting them up to a kidnapping plot that we were told was true but was entrapment. Same thing with the Capitol Police, people letting them in freely. Many of those people then being charged.
Look,
the government cannot put you up to do something and then charge you for it. That's wrong.
I don't want to have to.
Wrong to the left,
I don't want to have to interrupt you. I really don't. but I don't want you to mislead the audience here or
I'm
at
not.
home.
Abby, I think they've been misled by the mainstream media.
14
I mean, the amazing thing about that is he referenced multiple lies that the FBI told, that the Russians had blackmail control over Donald Trump, that the Trump campaign criminally conspired with the Russians to hack into the DNC, that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, and every one of those lies came from CNN, as well as other media outlets. And then she has the audacity to say, look, the reason I'm interrupting you is because I cannot allow disinformation to go over the CNN airways. Now, I don't know how many people are watching this show, but I know that CNN has a very tiny audience. But so the idea that the CNN airwaves are sacrosanct, it doesn't really matter that much. But do you see the level of delusion these people have, that they can, with a straight face, say, we don't allow disinformation here, when so many of the main stories that have come from CNN over the last 7 or 8 years have been utter lies, to say nothing of COVID and all the disinformation and deceit that came from there, or the war in Ukraine, over and over and over? Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.